Haidong! In this video, we're going to talk about basics, part 2. So at this point, we do a lot of center cuts, right? So showing Peggy, Hana, tool, set, and all that fun stuff. So things that I'll be looking for, at least in terms of an instructor looking at students, instructor looking at other masters, etc., is that arc. So making sure I'm actually reaching out for that cut. Because one thing that I'm painfully aware that happens a lot is this kind of cut. Right? Notice that I have no power in my cut, and also the hands are just kind of like dropping here, like right? Worse, you could do this kind of thing, which you think I might be joking, but I've seen it. Yeah, so the idea behind this, right, is to reach into the cranium, right? So this is our target area, is we're reaching into between the two hemispheres, cut in and follow through, right? So actually this last part is not as important, at least in terms of if we're aiming for the head, right? But it's really important in terms of drawing it through, right? So obviously you can't do this kind of cut with, or as much with a straight sword because you'll probably get embedded. You can still slice this way, but that's the reason why we use curved swords, is because it more naturally falls through that angle. Also at this point we can talk about that breathing, right? So in general, you're going to be breathing out for all the cuts. So you're breathing out with all the cuts in that series. So in this case, Chum Peggy is one thing in the series. So all you need to do is breathe in probably as you prep, right? Right? Versus when we eventually do Cha U Peggy, which is our left-right cut, we're going to be breathing out twice, but breathing in only once. Samnon Peggy, breathe out 3 times, breathe in once. Guangcha Peggy, 6-time cut, breathe out 6 times, and breathe in once. So the idea of that is to always exhale when you're doing a series of cuts. And another thing you can notice as you're going through this is how your students or your masters are kiai, right? Kiapping. Kiapping is this Korean. Kiapping, right? So as opposed to ea, for some reason ea is really, really popular when people don't want to actually kiai, right? Now, if you watch my videos long enough, you know I do a lot of ban, just because I am just weird. I am weird. I'm fine with that. But if you're trying to actually work on your kiai, right, kiap, you want to think about also you're trying to punch someone with your voice, right? So it's not a ah! So you shouldn't have anything strangled in your voice. It should be a nice that you're trying to push back someone, right? So this is another interesting use of what we call pressure. So I know I mentioned this like in the deep past, but pressure is a major, major concept for higher level swordsmen and martial arts in general, right? So being able to manipulate the pressure and all that fun stuff. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, I sound like a crazy person. I understand. I've tried to have this conversation so many times with different people, and they were like, yeah, pressure, yeah, cool, but if you are aware of the idea of pressure, this is a good way to, again, instantiate it a little bit more, right? Because your kiai, your breath, is a portion of it, right? So you don't want to be like, ea, which is just like you're talking a kiai, versus, right? That's a lot more like you're pushing and enforcing your will. That's going to sound weird, but enforcing your will against an opponent in terms of, again, pressure and trying to overpower their pressure. But with that, so that's a nice side thing that you can probably notice at this point, because at this point you're going to be having students who are ki-upping, so you can be you can have a brief rest maybe and discuss like, all right, so what is the purpose of the ki-up? Why do you do that? We can just stay silent, and silently like, stab someone. So that's a good point for you to pause and talk to your students about that. So the next part, right? So we just did Chum Peggy. We're going to do Cha U Peggy. So Cha U is left, right cut. So I'm not going to do a mirror image so you can see it, just because there's going to be other things that aren't going to be mirror image, and I want to make sure I'm consistent. So left, right cut. You're going to bring up over your left side. So notice that the seam over here lifts a little bit. So here, and follow through. So what this is doing is following this angle, right? So you're cutting either into the temple and cutting down to the same spot, right? So the center cut ended here, so does the left cut, and so does the right cut. So it ends in the same spot down here, but you're going to be cutting at these different angles, and obviously this is going to be where you're going to be talking to your students about why, right? Because we just did jumping peggy, if I hit someone square in the head and I finish them off, why do I need another cut? Well, there's going to be other reasons, right? So this is going to be true in terms of target area, right? So if I'm here, I can strike someone's wrist with a nice right cut as I'm evading to my right. I can also go around someone's guard a little bit, right? So if I was aiming for the center cut, they give me like a really strong block. I can aim for their wrist and stuff like that. And another use you can do for this is when you're translating or sliding to the side. So for example, I'm sliding to my right, I'm going to do a left cut to follow through. So that way I'm going to have the translation of my body and still be able to hit the head and all that fun stuff. So what I mentioned before, right, so breathe in once and then out twice, right? So you breathe in and then over, bun, and up, right? So there's going to be a few different things to note with this. So with the Federation, you do shift over and then cut, right? As opposed to staying up here and then as you cut, you switch into position. So that is a more kendo related cut because it's working on deception. So the idea with that one is I'm coming up, you don't know if I'm going for a center, you don't know if I'm going for the side, you don't know if I'm going to do like a weird uppercut. So if I'm here and I practice going side to side, that's going to be a different kind of cut. Versus the Federation is like, all right, we're just working on developing the power in that cut. If we want to work on that deception, we can do that a little bit later. But these are fundamentals. These are the basics. So you're going to be here, bring up, over, cut, and then fall back. One thing to note, so as you cut, notice that I'm going to follow the same track back up and up to the other side. So what you might ask is, why? So why does it matter that we do that, right? Well, as you can probably imagine, if you slice into someone and just do you're in someone, this is gonna get stopped. Versus if you're here, allegedly you can follow the same track back out and then finish off the other side. So this is going to be true for pretty much all of your cuts that are going to be going in the center-ish direction. Is you want to follow the same direction back because you're going to be following again out of the body the same way you entered, just so you don't get stuck. And it's also just a nice little detail for people to know. So next will be samdan pegi or 3-cut. That's going to be center cut, left cut, and right cut. So same thing, 1 breath in, 3 times out, right? So for example, breathe in, right? And you're going to keep repeating that one. So one purpose of having samdan pegi, because you might think like, all right, we did center cut, we did chagu pegi, why do we need 3 in a row now? Well, it's going to be working on your ability to work up to a certain amount of breathing, right? Because it does take a while, right? So even if you know you can do it on a good day, this can still be working up to something, right? So if you're just working on breathing once, okay, now I got breathing twice, okay, I got now, bun, bun, bun. It works up to eventually that guangcha pegi. So this is a nice transition from the cha'u pegi to the guangcha pegi because that is another combination that requires a big lungful of air. So this is just working up your endurance, even within a session, to get to that guangcha pegi. Next is our huangdan pegi. So huangdan pegi means a middle cut. So here, all you do is twist into huangdan. So notice that I have a little bit of a gap here, but notice my pinky is still attached to here. So the purpose of huangdan is aim for the middle because that's the hardest thing to block. So it's easier in general for people to move back away from a crosscut as opposed to intercepting it. So this is a nice getting your space motion. So notice as we do huangdan pegi, so it's going forward and comes back to a ready position. So this might seem a little bit weird because in the previous couple, right, so we finished here, we kind of ended where the tip was still honed in on your opponent, but for now, it seems a little bit weird, right, because you're like, yeah, and you're here, right? So the purpose of this is to be able to throw another one after another one, versus when we eventually go up to subyoung pegi, this is going to be, so if I still need to dispatch you, I can use a false edge, I can deflect or something like that. This is just trying to get someone to back off, and you can keep moving as such. So this is also one thing that I think has changed back and forth with the Federation, but just be aware. So for now, as of 2020, the idea is just from here, over, right? So back in the day, we did up, then over. So just keep that in mind. So this changes every couple of years. So probably by the time you either watch this video in the future, or if you live in a different region, so if you don't live in the US or let alone the northeast of the United States, this might also be different because information travels differently to all these different countries. So it might be different for you, but it's the way that we've been taught. It is to bring it over and start going back on Huangdan or middle cut. Likewise, subyoung pegi. So subyoung pegi is aiming for the chest level crosscut. So this has a different use, right? Because Huangdan is to get you to back off, which is actually why we even have, so first of all, kimase, hips are back, bomse, hips are back. So that's a major theme, is just keeping your hips back, but still being able to attack someone, because someone could easily just go through your hips. So what's subyoung pegi doing, right? So subyoung pegi is just an attack cut, just a little bit raised, right? So again, so from here, you follow through the target, but you maintain it here, and then other side, other side, other side, right? So you're maintaining that tip, so if you need to, you can either thrust or something like that, be able to deflect if you need to, but you're more engaged in a fight, because this is an actual fighting move as opposed to a clearing move. So that's one reason there's a difference between Huangdan, middle, and subyoung, which is a raised crosscut. The next portion is optional, so the seison and the taison pegi, I believe, are a little bit more optional depending on, first of all, if you know the technique. Yeah, so taison and seison pegi. So seison pegi is just going to be from here, diagonal, diagonal, right? Just around the head, ban, ban. So this is introducing the student to our diagonal cuts, our 45 cuts, before we go into guangsha, or the light, or the 6-time cut. Right, so here, just around the head, over the shoulder, again, over the head, ban, ban. Taison pegi is around the head, uppercut, other side, diagonal cut, uppercut. Now that looks very familiar if you know the cutting focus, so it's the beginning of our first cutting focus. But taison pegi is just continuation, right? So ban ban, ban ban. So at this point, I like to talk to my students about, first of all, the difference between our diagonal and our uppercuts, right? So diagonal cuts are probably going to be our most powerful cut when we're moving into it. What about uppercuts, right? So the uppercuts generally aren't as effective. They'll be good for like geometric attacks, but not going to be good for raw power as much. Now that said, like this side, you kind of like do a little bit of a hop and skip. Can be pretty powerful, but it's not going to be as powerful in general, especially if you're going more onward towards someone. So at this point, I like to be like, all right, our diagonal cuts, really powerful. Uppercuts, eh. So what do you use your uppercuts for? Depending if the students are used to my shenanigans and my question asking, they might answer correctly, they might not answer at all. We'll find out. But usually what happens with these forward uppercuts is I'm trying to make someone back off. So as opposed to, so similarly to our crosscuts, right? So our Huangdan pegi, our uppercuts, because they're harder to block, obviously you can do like a deflection and all that fun stuff. But our uppercuts are moving someone away from us, so it's a good way to do that, right? Because it's hard to block, it's just getting someone away. Now that said, you could use this in a fighting situation, but in terms of like general practice as of right now, think about using your uppercuts for warding off as opposed to necessarily blowing out a rib or blowing out someone's knee, which you could do, but in the future. That's it for now with part 2. There's obviously going to be a part 3 coming in the future. Yeah, so for now, just keep those ideas in mind as you go through your basics. in addition to other concepts, right? So, for example, so we're still, pretty early on in the basics. Think about your hip placement, right? So think about your hips being curled back, right? So when you're in that nice kimase, feel the weight. That took a few times. Feel the weight of your hips as it sinks back, and good counterbalance to the weight of your sword. So one thing I am going to recommend, especially if this is not for white belts yet, is for you to first of all practice with a scabbarded weapon, but also with a metal sword if you can. Not necessarily sharp, but practice with a metal sword so you get, again, used to, first of all, wearing a scabbard, as well as having a little bit more weight to your cuts. Especially if your sword does have the blood groove and it's able to make a sound when you have a nice cut, all the better. Yeah, so with that, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Haidong!